They said the man was guilty of treason, but what they did to him went far beyond punishment. It wasn't just an execution, it was a slow, public unmaking of a human being. His screams echoed to the capital for hours, while crowds gathered not to stop it, but to watch. The executioner didn't swing a sword or pull a rope. He used a knife, small, sharp, and precise, and he didn't aim to kill quickly. This was Lingchi, known in the West as death by 1,000 cuts. It was a punishment reserved for the worst crimes in imperial China. But even by those standards, one execution in the early Ming Dynasty went too far. Not because of the method, but because of how long it lasted and who ordered it. The man who suffered it, once an official, once a scholar. His name was Yu Hongtu, a name most people have never heard, but his story will chill you. Who was Yu Hongtu? Yu Hongtu had a brilliant start. Born into a respected family, educated in the Confucian classics, and chosen to serve in the imperial administration. He was not a criminal. He was a bureaucrat, and like many in his position, he played the dangerous game of court politics. The Ming Dynasty was harsh. The emperor, known today as the Hongwu Emperor, was obsessed with loyalty. He believed betrayal should be punished in a way that would never be forgotten, not just by the traitor, but by everyone watching. Yu Hongtu was accused of plotting against the throne. Was it true? Some say yes. Others believe he simply spoke the wrong words to the wrong person. But truth didn't matter once the emperor made up his mind. The imperial judgment. He was dragged into the court in chains. Witnesses claimed he was calm, as if still trying to explain. But the emperor didn't want explanations. He wanted pain. The verdict came fast. Lingchi. It was rare, even in ancient China, where punishments would be brutal. Lingchi was more than death. It was meant to destroy the body, the spirit, and even the memory of the person. His name would be wiped from family records. His children, if he had any, would be banned from ever serving in government. But for you, the worst part wasn't the punishment. It was knowing what was about to happen and being alive for every second of it. Preparing the execution grounds. The execution wasn't held in secret. It was staged in the center of the capital, a deliberate display. Guards built a wooden platform just outside the city gates. Word spread quickly. By morning, the square was packed. Men climbed trees. Children were lifted onto shoulders. The people of Beijing came not just to see death, but to feel the emperor's power in their bones. Yu Hongtu was brought in a cart. His arms and legs were tied, and a wooden collar wrapped around his neck. His clothes were already torn. Exposing the pale skin the executioner would soon slice. The man who would do it, the executioner, had trained for this, not just to kill, but to stretch death out for hours. The first cut, they started at the chest. One clean slice, just beneath the collarbone. It wasn't deep, not meant to kill, just enough to let blood trickle and nerves scream. You didn't cry out at first, but his body jerked. His eyes widened, and the crowd leaned in. Then came the second cut, a little lower, just beside the ribs. The executioner moved slowly, wiping his blade on a cloth between cuts. His face showed no anger, no joy, only discipline. By the 10th cut, Yu Hongtu was trembling. By the 15th, he was moaning, but he was still conscious. That was the point. Why Lingchi was invented. Lingchi wasn't just about death. It was about unmaking someone in front of others, turning their body into a lesson. Chinese law listed it for crimes like treason, parricide, or attempting to kill the emperor. But in truth, it was used to send a message. And the message was this: Disloyalty will not just end your life, it will erase your dignity, your legacy, and your name. It wasn't used often, precisely because it was so horrifying, but that's why it worked. People who watched never forgot. The crowd turns quiet. By the time you had endured 30 cuts, something strange happened. The crowd stopped cheering. Children hid behind their mothers. Older men looked away. It was no longer entertainment. It was too real. Yu Hongtu was still alive. His body had started to sag forward, and blood stained the platform. His chest looked like raw meat, yet his eyes were still moving. The executioner paused only to wipe his knife again. It wasn't about hate. It was about obedience. He had a number to reach. Some records say 100 cuts. Others say 120. But all agree Yu was conscious for most of them. The mercy cut? Some accounts suggest a strange moment during the torture. After dozens of cuts, one officer stepped forward. He whispered something to the executioner, perhaps asking for mercy, perhaps ordering one deep cut to end it. But the executioner shook his head. The emperor had given a number. Until it was reached, the knife would keep moving. So the slicing continued, thighs, shoulders, cheeks. A single crowd member fainted, but no one left, because in ancient China, not watching would have been seen as dishonoring the emperor's justice. Cutting into the face. When Yu Hongtu's chest, legs, and arms had been sliced open, there was still more to go. The final cuts were saved for the face, the most personal, the most humiliating. With every move of the blade, the man who once debated policy and wrote poems was turned into something else. Not a person, a symbol. The executioner made small slices along Yu's cheeks, lips, and ears. Blood flowed steadily, soaking the cloth tied around his neck. At this point, Yu's head hung limp. Some say he had lost consciousness. Others claim he was still breathing, his body twitching with each motion. The crowds had stopped reacting. Silence settled like a fog. No one dared speak. This was no longer about one man. It was about power. The final cut, the one that ended his life, came only after the full number had been reached. Some records say it was the 120th. Others say it was more. No one agrees on the exact count. What they do agree on is this. It was a clean slice across the throat, not out of mercy, but to finish the ritual. Yu Hongtu's body was now ruined, but that wasn't the end. After death came more. After he was dead, his body wasn't returned to his family. There would be no grave, no ceremony, no mourning rites. Instead, his remains were dismembered and displayed. Pieces of his flesh were nailed to the walls of the city. This was meant to show others, this is what happens to those who challenge the emperor. Even his name was erased from official records. His family was shamed, his property taken. It was as if he had never existed, except as a warning. In ancient China, this was called posthumous punishment. Death wasn't the end. It was just a doorway into public disgrace. The man behind the order. So who gave the order? It came directly from the emperor, the Hongwu emperor, the founder of the Ming Dynasty. He had risen from a poor peasant background and ruled with fear. He trusted very few, and he believed that harsh punishment kept order. Yu Hongtu wasn't the only one to face Lingchi under his rule, but he may have suffered the most infamous version of it. Some historians believe the emperor watched the execution himself. Others say he simply received reports. Either way, he knew exactly what was happening, and he approved. A nation learns to obey. The impact of Yu's execution was massive. Officials began to fear not just failure, but thought itself. Speaking out became dangerous. Even silence could be punished if it looked like disloyalty. Lingchi had served its purpose. For decades after, people whispered Yu Hongtu's name only in private. Parents used the story to warn their sons. Don't rise too fast. Don't speak too boldly. And above all, don't stand out. Because in Ming China, even innocence couldn't save you. Could this happen again? You might think this kind of thing belongs in the past. But the lesson of Yu Hongtu isn't just about one country or one time. It's about what happens when fear becomes law, when the state no longer seeks justice, but obedience, and when people watch cruelty, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. The real horror of Lingchi wasn't the knife. It was the silence that surrounded it, the way people accepted it, the way the world kept turning. That silence is the most chilling part of all. Remembering what was meant to be forgotten. Today, Yu Hongtu's story is almost unknown. His name doesn't appear in tourist guides. There are no statues, no plaques, only fragments in old court records and whispers in banned books. But history has a strange way of surviving. In some parts of China, the phrase "a thousand cuts" is still used, not just for pain, but for betrayal. For when someone's punishment goes too far, it is said that one of the guards who stood by that day never slept properly again. He saw Yu's face every night, not because he pitied him, but because he wondered if he might be next. Power has no friends, only examples. And Yu Hongtu became one of the darkest. Would you have watched? We like to believe we wouldn't stand by, that we'd turn away, that we'd speak out, but history shows something else. Crowds came willingly to Yu's execution. They didn't stop it. They didn't question it. They were part of it, not with knives, but with silence. And maybe that's a true danger. Not cruelty, but acceptance. What would you have done? The story of Yu Hongtu and the Lingchi execution reminds us that history is not just written in books. It's carved into bodies, into silence, into fear. It warns us about the cost of power and the price of standing alone. This is the wound history tried to hide, and now you know